In the company parking lot, laughter echoed when CEO Serena Whitmore pointed at the janitor's rusty old car. The October morning air was crisp, carrying her mockery across the asphalt, where employees had gathered for what she called Show-Off Friday, a ritual where the company's elite parked their newest acquisitions in the front row, competing for her approval like peacocks displaying their plumage. Serena stood in her crimson dress, golden hair falling in perfect waves past her shoulders, 34 years of privilege worn like armor. Her finger extended toward the far corner of the lot, where a 1968 Plymouth Barracuda sat rust, spreading across its hood like a diseased paint, faded to the color of forgotten pennies. Does it even start? Her voice carried just enough volume to ensure everyone heard just enough inflection to make them laugh on cue. The executives in their tailored suits chuckled obediently, their Audis and BMWs gleaming behind them in the morning light. Henry Dalton emerged from the shadows of the building, 36 years old, but with eyes that carried decades more. Tall and lean, with hands that bore the memory of 1,000 careful repairs, he moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to being invisible. His gray coveralls, neatly pressed despite their age, marked him as clearly as a brand. Janitor. Maintenance. Disposable. He walked past the gathering without acknowledging their laughter, without changing his pace or expression. He simply pulled keys from his pocket and approached the Barracuda. Serena's smile widened, sensing an opportunity for entertainment. "Show us what that antique can do, Henry." She emphasized his name with subtle condescension, her audience leaning forward in anticipation of the punchline. Henry slid into the driver's seat, the leather cracked but clean. His fingers moved with practiced precision across the dashboard, flipping switches in a sequence known only to him. When he turned the key, the engine didn't sputter or cough as expected. It roared to life with a sound that silenced the parking lot. Not the desperate wheeze of an old car, but something altogether different. A harmonic purr that suggested power held in perfect balance, energy flowing in impossible synchronicity. It was the sound of precision engineering, of mathematical perfection translated into mechanical form. For just a moment, Serena's smile faltered. Her practiced confidence gave way to genuine surprise before she recovered, tossing her hair and turning back to her admirers. Yet her eyes lingered on the Barracuda as Henry backed out of the space and drove toward the exit, the engine's unusual timbre hanging in the air like an unanswered question. The echo of that sound followed her into the building, into the executive elevator that carried her to the top floor of Whitmore Motors. The company her father had built, a legacy she'd inherited and expanded with ruthless efficiency. From her corner office, Detroit sprawled beneath her factories and freeway, intersecting in the choreography of American industry. Her industry now. She dismissed the janitor's car from her thoughts as she reviewed the day's agenda. Whitmore Motors stood on the precipice of its greatest triumph, a government contract worth billions for the development of an eco-engine, a high-performance system that could run cleaner and longer than anything currently on the market. Teams of engineers had been working around the clock, their progress monitored by the countdown calendar on her wall. 62 days until the final presentation. 62 days to solve the problems that still plagued the prototype. Problems that sometimes, in the darkness of sleepless nights, she feared might be insurmountable. While Serena coordinated with department heads and reviewed performance metrics, Henry Dalton moved through the lower levels of the building with a different kind of efficiency. He emptied trash bins, wiped windows, mopped floors that would be dirty again by tomorrow. Work without recognition, labor that became visible only in its absence. But Henry moved with the dignity of a man who understood the value of what others overlooked. He cleaned the research labs and engineering bays with particular care, his eyes occasionally lingering on the whiteboards covered in equations or the computer screens displaying schematics. Sometimes his lips moved silently, working through calculations while his hands continued their automatic motion with mop or cloth. When engineers argued over coffee about regenerative braking systems or energy flow modulators, Henry listened as he collected their empty cups. He recognized the problems they were struggling with, understood the solutions that eluded them, but he said nothing. He was just the janitor. At lunch, Henry sat alone in his car, the driver's side door open to catch the autumn breeze. From an old leather satchel, he withdrew a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a thermos of black coffee. Then, with furtive glances to ensure he was unobserved, he removed a worn notebook and made notations with a stub of pencil diagrams and calculations flowing from his fingers with practiced ease. The contrast between them was absolute. Serena lived in a penthouse overlooking the Detroit River, threw parties that made headlines in the society pages, and drove a different luxury car each week. Henry lived in a small apartment above a hardware store, ate simple meals, and spent his evenings in a rented garage bay, maintaining the Barracuda with painstaking attention. She saw people as assets or obstacles. He saw them as ghosts. He no longer had the energy to engage. She believed worth was demonstrated in visibility. He believed it was inherent regardless of who was watching, and neither of them understood the other at all. The janitor had not always been a janitor. 15 years earlier, Henry Dalton stood in a NASA control room, his name emblazoned on an access badge that hung around his neck. At 31, he was already a rising star in aerospace engineering, with patents for satellite navigation systems and proposals for more efficient propulsion technologies. His mind worked in the language of physics and mathematics, translating theoretical possibilities into practical applications. It was there he met Sarah Chen, a chemical engineer whose brilliance matched his own. Where Henry saw systems in motion, Sarah understood the molecular dance that powered them. Together, they began to imagine something new, an engine that could recycle its own energy output, creating a near-perpetual cycle of motion. They called it the Phoenix engine, a system that could rise from its own thermal exhaust, converting waste heat back into usable energy through a proprietary combination of materials Sarah had developed. The principles weren't entirely new, but their implementation was revolutionary. Small-scale tests showed efficiency ratings that defied conventional limits. They married in a small ceremony, exchanging vows beneath the Florida Star's NASA colleagues, raising glasses to their shared future. For a wedding present, Sarah surprised him with the Barracuda, a restoration project they could work on together, transforming the classic car into a testbed for their ideas. In their garage late at night, they installed the first prototype. Sarah's laughter mixing with the smell of motor oil and solder as they made adjustments, her dark hair falling across calculations spread on a workbench, her eyes alight with the joy of creation. "We're going to change the world with this, Henry. We're going to help people who need it most." 3 years into their marriage, Sarah developed a persistent cough, then fatigue that coffee couldn't cure, then pain that medication couldn't touch. The diagnosis came like a physical blow: aggressive pancreatic cancer already metastasized. The prognosis measured in months, not years. Henry took a leave of absence from NASA, then resigned completely when it became clear Sarah needed full-time care. Their savings, substantial by most standards, evaporated into medical treatments that bought time but not healing. Experimental therapies drained their accounts, but couldn't stop the cancer's relentless advance. In the hospital, Sarah made him promise, "Don't let them bury the Phoenix. It's too important. It could help so many people." Henry nodded, holding her thin hand between both of his, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. While Henry sat beside Sarah's hospital bed, a larger corporation with connections to the aerospace industry filed paperwork. Patents were challenged, ownership disputed. Legal maneuvers buried their research under procedural complexities that would take years and millions to unravel. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in early spring, sunlight streaming through window blinds to pattern her still face. Henry buried her 2 days later, rain falling in sheets that matched his grief. He returned to an empty apartment and notices from attorneys about the patent disputes. He couldn't afford to fight, couldn't muster the energy to care about patents and proprietary rights when the future heat plant had collapsed. He disappeared into grief, taking a job that required nothing of his mind, nothing of his heart. He became a janitor, and the world forgot Henry Dalton, the engineer, had ever existed. But he kept the prototype hidden inside the rusted shell of the Barracuda. Beneath the cracked leather seats and behind a carefully modified firewall was the Phoenix engine, the original, the one Sarah had helped him build. He drove it every day, not because it was valuable, but because it was all he had left of her. Every turn of the key was a remembrance, every mile a memorial. For 10 years, Henry drifted through life on autopilot, working menial jobs that barely covered rent and food. Eventually, he found himself at Whitmore Motors, pushing a mop through corridors where engineers worked on problems he could solve in his sleep. It was a particular kind of purgatory to be surrounded by the field that had once defined him, yet remained separate from it, invisible within it. But in the evenings in his rented garage space, Henry continued to refine the Phoenix. Without Sarah's expertise in materials, progress was slower, but his understanding of systems allowed for incremental improvements. The engine grew more efficient, more stable. He disguised its unusual components beneath ordinary housings, added sound dampeners to mask its distinctive harmonics, installed switches that could toggle between conventional operation and the Phoenix's unique energy cycle. He kept his promise to Sarah in the only way he could. He preserved their creation, perfected it in small ways, and waited for something. A sign, perhaps. A door opening. A world ready for what they had built together. The day everything changed started like any other. Henry arrived at Whitmore Motors at 6, performed his morning rounds with mechanical efficiency, and found himself assigned to the main showroom, an unusual posting. The room had been transformed overnight for a special presentation. A stage constructed at its center, cameras positioned for maximum coverage, champagne flutes arranged on silver trays. Cleaning the already spotless space, Henry gathered that Whitmore Motors was unveiling their eco-engine prototype for government officials and investors. Serena Whitmore arrived at 9, entourage in tow, immediately spotting imperfections invisible to any eye but hers. The lighting wasn't quite right. The prototype's position needed adjustment. The refreshments weren't properly arranged. Her staff scrambled to accommodate while Henry faded into the background, dutifully polishing baseboards that didn't need polishing. By 10, the room had filled with men and women in expensive suits, their conversations a buzz of anticipation and speculation. Government representatives sat in the front row, their security details scanning the room with professional disinterest. Investors clustered in groups comparing notes on Whitmore's stock performance and competitors' movements. At precisely 10:30, Serena took the stage, radiant in her confidence, her voice carrying across the showroom without need of amplification. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of transportation. Behind her stood the concept car's sleek lines suggesting speed even in stillness, its surface gleaming under precise lighting. She outlined the specifications with practiced precision, the efficiency ratings, the reduced emissions, the performance metrics that exceeded federal guidelines. The crowd nodded appreciatively, cameras clicked, and Henry continued his slow circuit of the room's perimeter, watching from beneath lowered brows. Then came the moment of truth. Serena gestured to her lead engineer, a nervous man named Davidson, who climbed into the driver's seat with the careful movements of someone aware that millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs depended on the next 30 seconds. He turned the key. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, but the engine remained silent. Davidson tried again, his movements becoming less precise, more desperate. Still nothing. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Davidson exited the vehicle, whispering urgently to a team of engineers who converged on the prototype like surgeons to an operating table. Serena maintained her smile with the discipline of a career spent in the public eye, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the podium. Minutes ticked by, the murmurs grew louder, and representatives from the Department of Energy checked their watches with pointed emphasis. Davidson approached Serena, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can't figure it out. The diagnostics were perfect this morning. It's like the polarity reversed itself, but that's impossible without manual intervention." Serena's smile remained fixed, but her eyes went cold. She scanned the room looking for a distraction, a scapegoat, anything to divert attention from the disaster unfolding. Her gaze fell on Henry, still methodically working his way around the baseboards. "You," she called out, her voice carrying across the now quiet showroom. "The janitor. You're always hanging around the garage. Think you can make this work?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Investors exchanged amused glances. Someone muttered something about trying anything at this point. "If you can make it start," Serena added loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'll give you a whole dollar raise." More laughter, the kind that comes at someone's expense rather than from genuine humor. Henry looked up, meeting her eyes across the showroom floor. For a moment, he considered walking away. But then he thought of Sarah, of the nights they'd spent solving impossible problems together, of her belief that their work could help people. He set down his mop and crossed to the prototype. The crowd parted for him, their amusement shifting to curiosity as he approached the vehicle with the confident stride of a man who understood exactly what he was seeing. Henry opened the hood and studied the engine with practiced efficiency. His eyes tracked connections, noted the configuration, identified the problem within seconds. With precise movements, he disconnected. A component, rotated it 180 degrees and reattached it. Then he checked the circuit breaker, reset it, and tightened a ground wire that had worked itself loose. The entire process took less than a minute. Without a word to the engineers hovering at his shoulder, he walked to the driver's door, leaned in, and turned the key. The engine roared to life with a sound that silenced the room. Not just started, but sang a harmonic purr that suggested perfect balance energies aligned in flawless synchronicity. The dashboard lit up every system, showing optimal function. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then applause erupted, investors surged forward, and government officials nodded with renewed interest. Serena recovered, first stepping smoothly back into her role as confident CEO, redirecting attention to the vehicle's features as if the delay had been planned all along. Henry quietly returned to his mop and bucket, resuming his work as if nothing had happened. But Serena couldn't focus on her presentation. Her eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, to the man in gray coveralls who had saved her company's most important demonstration with a single adjustment that her entire engineering team had missed. And more disturbing still, the sound of the prototype's engine matched exactly the distinctive harmonics she'd heard from the janitor's Barracuda that morning. The demonstration continued, technical specifications were discussed, preliminary agreements were reached. But Serena's mind was elsewhere, turning over the implications of what she'd witnessed. When the event concluded and the last guest departed, she stood at the window and watched Henry cross the parking lot to his rusted car. He climbed in, turned the key, and the sound that emerged was unmistakable, identical to the prototype's distinctive harmonic. Serena's blood went cold with recognition and possibility. That night, alone in her penthouse, she replayed the morning's events in her mind. The janitor's unexpected competence, the identical engine sounds, the ease with which he had identified and corrected a problem that had stumped her engineers. She reached for the phone and dialed her assistant. "Leo, I need you to pull Henry Dalton's personnel file. Everything background reference of previous employment. I want to know who he is." Leo arrived at her door an hour later with a thin folder. "Not much here. He's been with us 3 years. Before that, his employment history is sparse. Some odd jobs, nothing remarkable. No red flags, though. He's reliable, quiet, never caused problems." Serena frowned, tapping manicured nails against her desk. It didn't add up. "Check the security footage. I want to see what he does after hours." Leo hesitated. "That's a bit invasive, don't you think?" "Just do it." 2 days later, Leo showed her the recordings. The footage was grainy, captured by parking lot security cameras, but clear enough to tell a story. Several nights a week after everyone else had gone home, Henry stayed late. He didn't enter the building. Instead, he worked on his car, opening the hood and making adjustments with the focused attention of an engineer, not a hobbyist. "Get me a closer angle." Leo managed to pull footage from a camera mounted near the garage entrance. The zoom wasn't great, but it revealed enough. Henry connecting diagnostic equipment, studying readouts on a handheld device, making precise adjustments to components that didn't match any standard engine configuration Serena recognized. In one clip, he removed panels from the engine bay, revealing a complex system underneath, definitely not factory standard for a '68 Barracuda. In another, he connected what appeared to be a power cell, then disconnected the fuel line entirely. The engine ran anyway, pulling power from somewhere inside itself, sustaining motion without external input. "That's impossible," Leo whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Serena didn't respond. Her mind was already calculating, plotting, seeing opportunities unfold. The following Friday, she organized a company party, ostensibly to celebrate the successful investor presentation. The executive team gathered in the main conference room, champagne flowing freely, congratulations exchanged with the forced bonhomie of corporate culture. In the middle of it all, Serena unveiled her surprise. On a large screen, she played the security footage of Henry working on his car. "This," she announced, her voice dripping with mockery, "is what our janitor does for fun." The room erupted in laughter. Executives pointed at the screen, making jokes about the rusty car, about Henry's stained coveralls, about the absurdity of a janitor thinking he was an engineer. Serena smiled, soaking in the validation, the shared superiority that reinforced her position at the top of the hierarchy. But then one of the older engineers, a man named Marcus, who'd been with the company for 20 years, stood up. He moved closer to the screen, studying the footage with a frown. "Stop," he said quietly. "Rewind that." Serena paused the video, curious despite herself. Marcus pointed at the engine on the screen. "That design? I've seen it before. It's just a junk engine from a junk car," Serena said dismissively. "No. Marcus shook his head, his expression troubled. Those aren't standard components. That's a regenerative loop system. And those markings on the casing, those initials HD. The room went quiet, the earlier laughter fading into uncomfortable silence. 20 years ago, Marcus continued, I attended a symposium at NASA. There was a presentation on sustainable energy systems. The lead researcher was a young engineer named Henry Dalton. He had a prototype called the Phoenix engine. It could regenerate its own power output, creating a near-perpetual energy cycle. It was revolutionary. He paused, his gaze still fixed on the screen, and then he just disappeared. The project died with him. Marcus turned to look at Serena, his expression grave. If that's the same man and that's the same engine, you're not looking at a janitor. You're looking at the most valuable piece of technology in the automotive industry. The laughter had died completely now, the mockery replaced by stunned silence. And in that moment, Serena realized she'd discovered something far more significant than she'd anticipated. The next morning, she called Henry into her office, preparing her approach carefully. She needed the engine, needed the technology needed to own whatever he'd build. But she also needed his cooperation, which meant she couldn't appear desperate. Henry entered quietly, still wearing his coveralls, his expression carefully neutral. He remained standing until Serena gestured to a chair across from her desk. I've been thinking about your car, she began, her tone deliberately casual. It's an interesting piece, vintage. I imagine it has sentimental value. It does, Henry replied simply. I'd like to buy it from you. Serena leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. Name your price. I collect classic cars. It would be well cared for. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Henry. We both know that. Her smile was sharp, predatory. $20,000 cash. That's more than the car's worth by any measure. No, $50,000. Henry stood, his patience evidently at an end. I should get back to work. Serena's own question snapped. She rose to her feet, her voice rising. A janitor doesn't own something that valuable. You don't even understand what you have. That engine, that technology, it belongs in the hands of people who can actually do something with it. People like me. Henry moved toward the door, then turned, his voice soft but clear. People like you already tried to take it once. That's why I left the industry. That's why I'm a janitor now. Because people like you can't be trusted with things you didn't build. Get out, Serena hissed, her composure cracking. Henry opened the door but paused on the threshold. You really have no idea what you're looking at, do you? You see an engine and think it's about money. You're just like the corporation that stole my patents 15 years ago. You're just like the people who killed my wife's dream. The door closed behind him with barely a sound. Serena stood frozen behind her desk, fury and calculation warring in her expression. The next morning, Serena fired him. She had security escort him from the building, had his access badge deactivated, had his final paycheck cut and mailed. She told herself it was the right move, that he was insubordinate, that he'd been disrespectful. But deep down, she knew the truth. She'd fired him because she was furious that he wouldn't give her what she wanted. Firing Henry didn't give her access to the engine, however, and Serena couldn't let it go. She assembled a team of engineers sworn to secrecy and tasked them with replicating what they'd seen in the security footage. She provided them with every angle, every frame, every measurement they could extract from the grainy images. They worked for 2 weeks building their best approximation of Henry's design. It didn't work. The engine turned over but couldn't sustain itself. The energy loop collapsed after 30 seconds, the system overheating and shutting down. They tried again and again, each attempt failing in different ways. Finally, the lead engineer, Dr. Reeves, came to Serena's office looking exhausted. We can't do it, she admitted. The design is too advanced. There are components we don't even recognize, materials we can't identify from video alone. Whoever built this understood regenerative thermodynamics at a level we're still decades away from achieving. Find him, Serena snapped. Bring him back. Make him explain it. We've tried. He's gone. His apartment is cleared out. No forwarding address. It's like he vanished. Serena felt panic clawing at her chest. She'd had the answer in her hands, and she'd thrown it away out of pride. Days turned into weeks. The deadline for the government contract loomed closer, and Serena's engineers were no closer to solving the fundamental efficiency problems that plagued their prototype. Without a breakthrough, Whitmore Motors would lose billions in potential revenue, and Serena would lose the legacy her father had built. Then 3 weeks after Henry's departure, the news broke. A small startup called Phoenix Dynamics had secured a federal research grant worth $12 million for the development of clean energy vehicle propulsion systems. The founder and chief technology officer was listed as Henry Dalton, formerly of NASA. The automotive industry exploded with speculation. Journalists dug into Henry's history, uncovering his past achievements, his stolen patents, his years in obscurity. And slowly, piece by piece, they uncovered the connection to Whitmore Motors. A reporter named Angela Torres published an expose detailing how a corporation that would later become Whitmore Motors had stolen intellectual property from Henry Dalton 15 years earlier. The patents had been buried, the technology shelved, and Henry had been left with nothing. While his wife died from cancer, they couldn't afford to treat properly. The article included testimony from former employees, legal documents, and a statement from Henry himself: "I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because my wife believed this technology could help people, and I won't let it be buried again." The public response was immediate and fierce. Social media erupted with condemnation. Investors began asking uncomfortable questions. Board members demanded emergency meetings. And Serena Whitmore found herself at the center of a reputational crisis that threatened to destroy everything she had built. But the article had mentioned one more devastating detail. The corporation that had stolen Henry's work 15 years ago had been run by a man named Charles Whitmore, Serena's father. That night, Serena searched her father's old office, a room she'd preserved largely untouched since his death 5 years earlier. In a filing cabinet she'd never bothered to explore, she found a folder labeled Acquisitions, Special Projects. Inside were legal documents, patent applications, and a handwritten note in her father's script: "Acquired Dalton Thermal Regeneration System. Paid off attorneys. Phoenix project terminated. Cost us $200K in legal fees, but worth millions." Serena sat in the dark office for hours, the weight of the revelation crushing her. She'd spent her entire life building it on a foundation of theft. Every success, every achievement, every moment of pride had been tainted by her father's cruelty. And when she'd had the chance to make it right, she'd repeated his mistakes exactly. She'd mocked Henry, fired him, tried to steal from him again. In the darkness of her father's office, surrounded by the evidence of a legacy built on deception, Serena Whitmore faced the truth about herself for the first time. And what she saw made her physically ill. Morning found her still there, slumped in her father's chair, makeup smeared, hair disheveled. When her assistant arrived, concerned by her absence from scheduled meetings, she gave only one instruction: "Find Phoenix Dynamics. I need to speak with Henry Dalton." Across town, in a small industrial space he'd leased with the first installment of the federal grant, Henry Dalton worked alone. The concrete floors and high ceilings reminded him of the NASA workshops where he'd started, though this space was considerably more modest. Engine components lay scattered across workbenches, diagnostic equipment hummed in the corners, and in the center of it all stood the Barracuda hood open, the Phoenix engine gleaming within. He'd known this moment would come eventually. Had prepared for it as best he could, securing legal protection for his intellectual property, documenting the original design process, with Sarah establishing provenance for the patents that had been stolen. He hadn't sought the publicity that now surrounded Phoenix Dynamics, but he understood its strategic value. The more visible the project became, the harder it would be for anyone to bury it again. What he hadn't expected was the depth of emotion that resurfaced with each new development. Every interview, every demonstration, every step toward realizing the vision he and Sarah had shared reopened wounds he'd thought long healed. He found himself speaking to her in the quiet hours of the night, telling her about progress made and obstacles overcome, imagining her responses, her suggestions, her smile of approval. The door to the workshop opened, admitting a slice of autumn sunlight and a silhouette Henry recognized immediately. Serena Whitmore stood framed in the doorway, looking nothing like the polished CEO he'd known. Her clothing was rumpled, her face bare of makeup, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Serena stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. "I'm sorry," she said, the words emerging with obvious difficulty, "for what my father did to you, for what I did." The words hung in the space between them, inadequate, yet necessary. Henry straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "For what exactly?" "For mocking you, for firing you, for trying to steal what you built." She took a breath. "For what my father did to you." "You didn't know about that," Henry said quietly, his expression giving nothing away. "No, but that doesn't make it right. And when I found out, I should have come to you immediately. Instead, I tried to cover it up. I tried to replicate your work without your permission. I was just like him." Henry was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to a small table and poured 2 cups of coffee from a dented metal pot. He handed one to Serena, the gesture neither friendly nor hostile, simply human. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I want to make it right." Serena's voice was rough with emotion she clearly wasn't accustomed to expressing. "I know I can't undo what happened. I can't bring your wife back. I can't give you the 15 years you lost. But I want to try to fix what I can." "You can't buy redemption, Serena. I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to earn it." Henry studied her face, searching for sincerity, for deception, for the calculation he'd come to expect from her kind. What he saw appeared to satisfy some internal question, because he nodded once, a small acknowledgement. How, he asked simply, "Let me help you, not as a CEO, not as a buyer, but as someone who wants to make sure your technology reaches the people who need it. I have resources, connections, experience in manufacturing and distribution. You have the genius. Together we could actually change things. And what do you get out of it?" "Nothing," Serena admitted, then reconsidered. "Or everything. I don't know. I just know that I can't keep living the way I've been living, building on a lie, stepping on people to stay on top. I'm tired, Henry. I'm tired of being the villain." Henry set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. He walked to a side room and returned carrying a thick binder, its pages yellowed with age. He dropped it on the workbench between them. "These are the original design specifications for the Phoenix engine," he said, "written by hand by me and my wife. If you can build this engine from these plans alone, no help, no shortcuts, then I'll know you're serious. I'll know you actually understand what you're asking for." Serena opened the binder. The pages were covered in complex equations, intricate diagrams, notations in 2 different handwritings. It was intimidating, overwhelming, possibly beyond her capabilities despite her engineering background. "How long do I have?" she asked, meeting his eyes. "As long as it takes." Serena took the binder home. She cleared her schedule, canceled meetings, and locked herself in her penthouse with the plans spread across her dining room table. She ordered components, rented workspace, and began to build. It was harder than anything she'd ever done. The mathematics were brutal, the engineering principles foreign to someone whose education had been theoretical rather than practical. She made mistakes, dozens of them, each one requiring her to start over. Her hands, used to signing documents and shaking hands at board meetings, blistered from working with tools. She slept in her workshop, ate takeout cold from the container, lost track of days in the obsessive focus of creation. But slowly, component by component, the engine began to take shape. She learned the language Sarah and Henry had created, the shorthand they developed, the logic that connected each part to the whole. She began to understand not just how the engine worked, but why they had designed it that way, the philosophy behind each choice. And as she worked, something unexpected happened. Serena Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Motors, heir to a fortune built on stolen ideas, began to change. The ruthless efficiency that had defined her professional life gave way to something deeper, an appreciation for creation itself, for the elegance of good design, for the potential of technology to serve humanity rather than merely generate profit. For the first time in her life, she built something with her own hands, something real, something that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock valuations. And in that creation, she began to understand what she'd been missing, what her father had never taught her about the true value of work. As the Phoenix engine took shape under her inexperienced but increasingly capable hands, Serena Whitmore underwent a transformation more profound than any she could have anticipated. The woman who entered Henry Dalton's workshop would be unrecognizable to the one who would eventually leave it. And somewhere, perhaps, Sarah Chen smiled at the unexpected legacy of the engine she and her husband had dreamed into being so many years before, not just a revolution in energy, but a revolution in understanding. Not just power measured in kilowatts, but power measured in redemption. The journey had only just begun. 6 weeks into her work on the Phoenix engine, Serena's penthouse had transformed into a makeshift engineering lab. The pristine dining table now served as her primary workbench, its polished surface scratched and stained with oil. Complex diagrams covered the windows overlooking the Detroit River, blocking the view she once prized. but creating a cocoon of focused energy. Component parts organized in careful arrangements stretched across her living room floor, forming a mechanical mandala that only she could interpret. Tonight marked another failed test. The regenerative loop had initiated properly but collapsed after 90 seconds, the thermal exchange destabilizing at precisely the point where it should have become self-sustaining. Serena stared at the smoking prototype, her exhaustion momentarily overwhelmed by frustration. She'd been so close, closer than any previous attempt. She pushed back from the table, hands trembling slightly from caffeine and fatigue. 6 weeks of 18-hour days had hollowed her cheeks and darkened the skin beneath her eyes. Her golden hair, once meticulously styled, was now pulled back in a practical ponytail streaked with engine grease despite her best efforts. The transformation went beyond her appearance. The boardroom confidence that had defined her professional identity had given way to the humbler persistence of a true engineer, someone who understood that failure was simply data, another step toward solution. The Phoenix designs challenged her in ways her formal education never had. Sarah Chen's notes on molecular bonding required Serena to relearn basic chemistry principles she'd skimmed through in college. Henry's systems integration approaches operated on mathematical models she'd never encountered in standard engineering courses. Together, their work represented not just technical innovation, but a fundamentally different philosophy of design, one that worked with natural energy flows rather than forcing them into artificial patterns. Pulling her notepad closer, Serena recorded the test results with methodical precision, then examined the component that had failed. The problem wasn't in her assembly, but in the materials themselves. The alloy used in the thermal exchange unit couldn't handle the heat distribution pattern necessary for sustained operation. Sarah's notes described a proprietary composite material, but recreating it without her expertise was proving impossible. The intercom buzzed, breaking Serena's concentration. She'd given strict instructions not to be disturbed, making the interruption all the more unwelcome. "Ms. Whitmore, there's a Dr. James Carter here to see you. Says it's about Phoenix Dynamics." The name meant nothing to her, but the company was reason enough to respond. "Send him up." Minutes later, Serena opened her door to find a tall African-American man in his 50s, his bearing suggesting military background despite the civilian clothing. His expression was carefully neutral, evaluative. James Carter extended his hand. "I worked with Henry and Sarah at NASA. I'm helping Henry establish Phoenix Dynamics now. He's not aware I'm here." The unexpected visit triggered Serena's defensive instincts. She gestured toward the chaos of her living room, making no attempt to hide the evidence of her project. "Come to check on my progress, or to make sure I'm not stealing more of Henry's work?" James surveyed the disassembled engine components with professional interest. "Neither. I came to see if you're serious. Henry told me about your arrangement. I had my doubts. Why would you care?" James's gaze shifted from the machinery to Serena herself, noting her disheveled appearance. The blisters on her hands, the fatigue etched in her posture. "Because Henry Dalton is the finest engineer I've ever known, and Sarah Chen was perhaps the most brilliant material scientist of her generation. Their work deserves to see the light of day. But more importantly, they were my friends. I watched what happened to them when your father's company stole their patents. I saw what it did to Henry when Sarah died." Serena flinched visibly at the direct reference to her father's actions, but didn't look away. She'd spent too many sleepless nights confronting that legacy to retreat from it now. James continued, his tone softening slightly. "The question isn't whether you can build this engine. The question is why you're trying. A month ago, I would have said it was to fix my father's mistake." Serena gestured toward the scattered components. "But now I think it's because this is the most important work I've ever done. Because Sarah and Henry created something that could genuinely help people, and it deserves to exist." Her voice strengthened with conviction that surprised even her. "And because I need to know if I can be something more than Charles Whitmore's daughter." James studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "You're stuck on the thermal exchange unit. The material composition was Sarah's specialty. You won't find it in those notes." "You've built this before," James shook his head. "No, but I watched them develop it. The material requires specialized processing equipment. Equipment I have access to." Serena's eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "So Henry sent you to test me?" James's laugh held genuine amusement. "Henry Dalton doesn't send people to do anything. I came because 15 years ago, I promised Sarah I'd help protect their work if anything happened to her. I'm keeping that promise the best way I know how." From an inside pocket, he withdrew a small notebook. Within its weathered pages were detailed formulations for the composite materials Sarah had developed, information not included in the binder Henry had provided to Serena. "This doesn't mean I trust you," James clarified, seeing the hope kindle in Serena's eyes. "It means I believe in giving people a fair chance to prove themselves." Sarah would have wanted that. Serena accepted the notebook with the reverence of someone receiving a sacred text. What did she see in this? What was she trying to build? Not what. Who? Sarah didn't see technology as something separate from humanity. She believed the right innovations could help restore balance between people and the natural world. The Phoenix wasn't just an engine to her, it was a philosophy made mechanical, a way of demonstrating that consumption doesn't have to mean destruction. The words resonated with something Serena had begun to sense during her weeks of working with the designs, an underlying principle that went beyond mere efficiency. She glanced at her latest failed prototype, seeing it with new eyes. "I've been building it wrong, haven't I? I've been treating it like any other engineering problem." James smiled slightly. "There's hope for you yet, Miss Whitmore." As dawn broke over Detroit, James and Serena hunched over her workbench, deep in discussion about molecular bonding patterns and thermal exchange cycles. The night had transformed the cautious visitor into an engaged collaborator, impressed despite himself by Serena's technical aptitude and stubborn persistence. Before departing, James hesitated at the door. "Henry has a demonstration scheduled for potential investors next Thursday. If you finish the engine by then, bring it to Phoenix Dynamics. Show him what you have learned, not just what you've built." Serena nodded, already turning back to her work mind, racing with new possibilities illuminated by Sarah's notes. The Phoenix was beginning to take shape in her understanding, not just as a mechanical construct, but as a vision of what technology could become. For the first time, she could see what Sarah had seen, and she wanted desperately to make it real. While Serena immersed herself in the challenge of the Phoenix engine, Henry Dalton faced challenges of his own at Phoenix Dynamics. The small industrial space had quickly become inadequate as the federal grant allowed for expanded operations. 3 engineers now worked under his direction, each bringing specialized expertise to complement his systems knowledge, but none fully understanding the holistic vision he and Sarah had developed. More problematic was the growing media attention. The automotive press had latched onto the David versus Goliath narrative of a former janitor challenging the industry giants with revolutionary technology. Environmental advocates celebrated the potential emissions reductions without grasping the deeper implications for energy independence. Investment offers poured in, each and requiring careful vetting to ensure the Phoenix wouldn't be buried again by corporate interests more concerned with quarterly profits than transformative potential. James Carter had become Henry's shield against these external pressures, handling investor relations and media inquiries, allowing Henry to focus on the technical work. But James couldn't shield him from the memories that resurged with each step forward. Every breakthrough carried Sarah's absence more keenly into the present, a ghost collaborator whose insights he still sought in moments of technical impasse. On this particular morning, Henry adjusted calibration settings on a testing apparatus, his attention so focused, he didn't immediately notice James's arrival. The older man observed silently for several minutes before speaking. "You should consider her offer, Henry. We need what she brings to the table." Henry didn't look up from his work. "She hasn't proven anything yet." "She will. I've seen her progress." Now Henry did look up, surprise and a flash of betrayal crossing his features. "You went to see her behind my back." James met his friend's gaze steadily. Someone had to. "You're so focused on whether she's technically capable that you're missing the larger question, which is whether she's changed, whether she understands what we're really building here. The government funding is just the beginning. Henry, when this goes into production, we'll be navigating waters filled with corporate sharks, patent lawyers, hostile takeover attempts, regulatory challenges. Serena Whitmore knows those waters. We don't." Henry's jaw tightened. "I know them well enough. They took everything from me once. I won't let that happen again. Precisely why we need her." James moved closer, lowering his voice despite the empty workshop. "This isn't just about you anymore, Henry. This is about Sarah's vision, about the difference this technology could make. If working with Charles Whitmore's daughter increases our chances of success, isn't that a price worth paying? Henry turned away, unable to formulate a response that didn't sound like the bitter grudge-holding he'd promised himself he would avoid. The truth was more complicated than simple resentment. Working with Serena meant acknowledging connections he'd spent years trying to sever, to NASA, to his former career, to the corporate world that had betrayed him, and most painfully to the life he and Sarah had planned together. The world believed Henry Dalton had returned for vindication, but his actual motivations remained private, too raw for public consumption. Some nights alone in a small apartment above the hardware store, he questioned whether he was honoring Sarah's memory or using it as justification for his own need to prove himself. The distinction troubled him more than he cared to admit. James sensed the internal struggle and changed tactics. I gave her Sarah's material formulations. She'll complete the engine within the week. Henry's head snapped up. Those were Sarah's personal notes. They weren't part of the test. No, they weren't. James's expression remained unrepentant. But they are part of making the Phoenix work. And isn't that the point? To see if she's committed to the technology itself, not just to earning your forgiveness. Henry had no ready answer. He turned back to his calibration work, but his focus had shattered mind churning with possibilities he wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. 3 days later, as Phoenix Dynamics prepared for its first major investor demonstration, an unexpected visitor arrived at Whitmore Motors. Angela Torres, the investigative journalist whose expose had revealed the connection between Henry's stolen patents and the Whitmore family, requested an interview with Serena. Under normal circumstances, Whitmore Motors' PR team would have declined, citing the ongoing reputational crisis, but Serena surprised her staff by agreeing to meet. The two women faced each other across Serena's office desk, the journalist's recording device between them like a demarcation line. Angela wasted no time on pleasantries. Your company's stock has fallen 27% since my article was published. The Department of Justice has opened a preliminary investigation into the patent theft. 3 major investors have publicly distanced themselves from Whitmore Motors. Care to comment? Serena met the journalist's challenging gaze without flinching. Your reporting was accurate. My father stole Henry Dalton's intellectual property 15 years ago. When confronted with evidence of that theft, I initially attempted to cover it up, then tried to acquire the technology through questionable means. Those are facts, not allegations. Angela's expression registered genuine surprise at the direct acknowledgement. She'd expected corporate doublespeak, not confession. Serena continued, her voice steady. I'm not seeking favorable coverage or attempting to spin a narrative. What my father did was wrong. What I did was wrong. The consequences you've described are appropriate responses to those actions. Then why agree to this interview? Most CEOs in your position would be huddled with attorneys preparing litigation against my publication. A month ago, I might have done exactly that. Serena's gaze drifted to the window where Detroit's industrial skyline stretched toward a clouded horizon. But I've spent the past 6 weeks building something, actually building it with my own hands, that has changed how I understand value. Her attention returned to the journalist. I agreed to this interview because I want to be clear about what happens next. Not for the sake of Whitmore Motors' stock price, but for the sake of the technology itself. Angela leaned forward slightly, journalistic instincts engaged by the unexpected candor. And what has happened next, I can't speak for Henry Dalton or Phoenix Dynamics, but I can tell you that Whitmore Motors will not contest any patent claims related to the Phoenix engine. We will cooperate fully with any investigation into the original theft. And I've initiated the process of establishing an independent ethics board to oversee our patent acquisition practices going forward. Noble sentiments, but corporate reform initiatives are standard crisis management tactics. Why should anyone believe this represents genuine change rather than image rehabilitation? Serena considered the question carefully. My father built Whitmore Motors on the principle that success justifies any means used to achieve it. I accepted that philosophy without question for most of my life. She paused, choosing her next words with precision. But when you spend weeks trying to recreate something as elegant and revolutionary as the Phoenix engine, you develop a different kind of respect, not just for the invention itself, but for the minds that conceived it, for the vision behind it. Her voice strengthened with conviction. Henry and Sarah Dalton weren't creating a product. They were solving a problem that affects everyone. The distinction matters. Angela's skepticism remained visible, but professional curiosity had engaged. Speaking of the Phoenix, your engineers have reportedly been unable to replicate the technology despite multiple attempts. How do you respond to speculation that Whitmore Motors intentionally buried the original patents to protect existing investments in conventional engine technologies? That speculation is logical but inaccurate in our case. The truth is simpler and more embarrassing. We couldn't make it work. The Phoenix requires a holistic understanding that goes beyond traditional engineering approaches. Serena gestured toward a series of technical journals on her bookshelf. We've been trained to think in terms of incremental improvements to existing systems. The Phoenix represents something fundamentally different, a paradigm shift in how we conceptualize energy generation and consumption. You sound like you admire it. I do. More than that, I believe in what it represents. Not just as a CEO considering market potential, but as someone who has come to understand the philosophy embedded in its design. Angela studied Serena with renewed interest, noting changes that went beyond the CEO's less polished appearance. There was a quality to her engagement that differed from their previous encounters, a directness that suggested the careful corporate persona had been at least partially dismantled. The remainder of the interview covered technical aspects of the Phoenix engine, potential applications beyond automotive use, and the broader implications for energy policy. Throughout, Serena maintained a balance between technical precision and accessible explanation that impressed even the skeptical journalist. When they concluded, Angela had material for a very different article than she'd anticipated writing. As the reporter gathered her belongings, Serena offered one final thought. The story here isn't about me or Whitmore Motors. It's about what happens when we value creation above ownership, solution above profit. Henry and Sarah Dalton understood that 15 years ago. I'm just beginning to learn it now. Angela paused at the door. And if Phoenix Dynamics succeeds without you, if Henry Dalton renders Whitmore Motors obsolete. For the first time in the interview, Serena smiled, a genuine expression unmarred by calculation. Then the world gets exactly what it needs, and I'll have the privilege of witnessing it. After the journalist departed, Serena returned to her private office workshop where the nearly completed Phoenix engine awaited final assembly. The interview had crystallized something she'd been feeling but unable to articulate throughout the building process, a fundamental shift in how she understood her role, not just as a CEO, but as a person. The Phoenix represented a chance to participate in something larger than corporate ambition, larger even than personal redemption. With renewed focus, she turned to the remaining work, aware that tomorrow's demonstration at Phoenix Dynamics would determine whether her transformation was sufficient to earn a place in the future Henry was creating. The morning of the investor demonstration dawned clear in cold autumn, asserting itself across Detroit with crimson and gold foliage standing stark against industrial gray. The Phoenix Dynamics facility had been transformed overnight. The workshop floor cleared and clean, demonstration areas arranged to showcase various aspects of the technology. Henry moved through the space with uncharacteristic nervousness, checking and rechecking equipment settings, rehearsing technical explanations under his breath. Despite the pressure, a quiet satisfaction underlay his anxiety. After 15 years of exile, of grief and obscurity, the Phoenix was finally emerging into the light. The assembled investors represented potential production partners who could help scale manufacturing beyond the prototype stage. The government officials in attendance could facilitate regulatory approval and infrastructure adaptation. Most importantly, the technology journalists would document the demonstration for the public record, ensuring the Phoenix could never again be buried in corporate archives. As the visitors began arriving, James Carter managed introductions and guided groups through preliminary exhibits explaining the basic principles behind the technology. Henry remained somewhat apart, observing from the periphery, still uncomfortable with the public role his return to the industry required. He answered technical questions when asked, but otherwise allowed James to manage the social dynamics. His attention was diverted by movement at the entrance, Serena Whitmore arriving alone carrying a hard-sided case. She'd abandoned corporate polish for practical attire, jeans work boots, and a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows. More notable than the clothing change was her demeanor, the imperious confidence replaced by the focused determination of someone with something to prove. Their eyes met across the crowded space. Henry didn't acknowledge her with more than a slight nod, but he watched as she placed her case near the back wall and circulated among the guests, many of whom reacted to her presence with barely concealed surprise. She didn't attempt to approach him directly, respecting the boundaries their arrangement had established. At precisely 10 o'clock, James called for attention, and introduced Henry, who stepped forward with outward composure that belied his internal tension. "This isn't a conventional product launch." Henry began, his voice stronger than expected. "The Phoenix engine represents a fundamentally different approach to energy generation and consumption. We're not offering incremental improvement. We're demonstrating transformation." He moved toward the central display where the engine sat mounted on a transparent testing platform. Its configuration appeared deceptively simple, compact, and elegant compared to conventional engines of similar output capacity. Henry explained the core principles without technical jargon, emphasizing practical applications rather than theoretical models. The Phoenix captures energy that conventional engines waste. It operates on a regenerative cycle that converts thermal exhaust back into usable power through a system we call the loop. In practical terms, that means greater efficiency, reduced emissions, and significantly extended operational capacity from the same energy input. Questions came from various quarters: government officials concerned about safety certifications, investors focused on production costs, journalists probing for technical specifics. Henry addressed each with patient clarity, neither oversimplifying nor retreating into engineering terminology beyond the audience's grasp. Then came the moment of demonstration. Henry initiated the startup sequence, and the engine came to life with its distinctive harmonic purr, that perfect balance of energies that had first caught Serena's attention in the parking lot months earlier. Displays mounted around the testing platform showed operating temperatures, efficiency metrics, and emissions data in real time, confirming performance far beyond conventional standards. For 30 minutes, Henry ran the engine through various operational scenarios: variable loads, stress conditions, recovery tests. Throughout, the Phoenix maintained consistent performance with minimal fluctuations, its regenerative cycle functioning exactly as designed. The audience's initial skepticism gradually gave way to genuine interest, then to the excited murmuring of people recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. As Henry concluded the planned demonstration, he opened the floor for additional questions. A Department of Energy representative raised his hand. "Impressive performance metrics, Mr. Dalton. But how does the Phoenix handle thermal degradation over extended operational periods? All regenerative systems eventually reach entropy limitations." Before Henry could respond, Serena stepped forward from the back of the room. "May I address that question?" Her request wasn't directed at the official, but at Henry, her gaze steady across the intervening space. A tense silence followed as the audience recognized the dramatic potential of the moment: Charles Whitmore's daughter addressing the man whose technology her father had stolen. Henry hesitated visibly, then nodded once, ceding the floor with a gesture that carried reluctant curiosity rather than welcome. Serena moved to the front of the room, stopping beside the Phoenix engine. "The thermal degradation concern is valid for conventional regenerative systems," she acknowledged. "But the Phoenix incorporates what Dr. Sarah Chen called adaptive cycling, a material response at the molecular level that actually strengthens bond cohesion through repeated thermal exchange." She placed a hand on the engine housing with the familiar gesture of someone who understood its inner workings intimately. "The composite materials in the thermal exchange unit undergo a kind of work hardening through operation. The more the Phoenix runs, the more stable its cycle becomes rather than less. It's counterintuitive from a standard thermodynamic perspective, but demonstrably effective." Her explanation carried the confidence of hands-on knowledge rather than theoretical understanding. Several technical journalists made notes, clearly impressed by the unexpected expertise from Whitmore Motors' CEO. The Department of Energy representative followed up. "You speak as if you have direct experience with the technology, Ms. Whitmore. I was under the impression that your company had been unsuccessful in replicating Mr. Dalton's work." "A fair impression." Serena glanced toward Henry, then back to the questioner. "Whitmore Motors couldn't replicate the Phoenix because we approached it as a conventional engineering challenge rather than recognizing the paradigm shift it represents." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But I've spent the past 6 weeks building one myself, component by component, to understand what we failed to grasp 15 years ago." A murmur ran through the crowd. Henry's expression remained carefully neutral, though his posture had tensed at her revelation. "The Phoenix isn't just an engine," Serena continued. "It's a philosophy of design that values regeneration over consumption, harmony over dominance, sustainability over planned obsolescence." Her gaze swept the room, engaging the audience directly. Those principles were revolutionary when Henry and Sarah Dalton conceived them 15 years ago. They remain revolutionary today and more necessary than ever. She turned to face Henry, directly speaking now to him alone despite the crowded room. I didn't come here to hijack your presentation or claim credit for your work. I came because I completed the challenge you set for me. Her voice lowered slightly. And because I believe in what you and Sarah created, not as a market opportunity, but as a genuine solution. The world needs the Phoenix Henry, not Whitmore Motors, not my redemption story, the Phoenix itself. The room had fallen completely silent, the gathered investors and officials recognizing they were witnessing something beyond a typical technology demonstration. The tension between Henry and Serena carried the weight of personal history and broader industry implications that transcended the immediate technical discussion. Henry studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke with deliberate calm. "Show us what you built, Ms. Whitmore." Serena crossed to the back of the room and retrieved her case. Returning to the demonstration area, she opened it to reveal a compact version of the Phoenix smaller than Henry's demonstration model, but recognizably the same technology. With practiced movements, she connected it to the testing apparatus, initiating the startup sequence without elaborate explanation. The room collectively held its breath as the smaller engine hummed to life, its signature harmonic matching the larger model with perfect fidelity. The monitoring displays registered performance metrics virtually identical to those Henry had demonstrated earlier, confirming that Serena had indeed mastered the technology's core principles. Henry moved closer, examining her work with professional scrutiny, noting adaptations she'd made to accommodate the smaller scale without compromising functional integrity. His expression remained guarded, but a reluctant respect showed in his attention to detail. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a complexity of emotion that belied the simplicity of his words. "You did it." Serena exhaled slowly, tension draining from her posture. "Yes, but more importantly, I understand why it matters." Her eyes held his with steady conviction. "I understand what Sarah was trying to build. Not just an engine, a different relationship between technology and the world that uses it." Around them, the audience had receded into background awareness, their presence momentarily forgotten as something shifted between the two antagonists. Not reconciliation precisely, the wounds ran too deep for that, but a recognition of shared purpose that transcended personal history. The moment broke when James Carter stepped forward, ever the pragmatist, suggesting they continue addressing audience questions. The demonstration resumed its formal structure, but something fundamental had changed. When technical inquiries arose, Henry and Serena began answering in tandem, their complementary knowledge creating more comprehensive explanations than either could have offered alone. By the time the event concluded 2 hours later, the initial tension had transformed into cautious, professional collaboration. Investors departed with clear interest, government officials with thoughtful consideration, and journalists with material for headlines that would reshape public perception of both Phoenix Dynamics and Whitmore Motors. As the last guest filed out, Henry James and Serena found themselves alone in the demonstration space. The silence between them carried the weight of decisions, yet unmade possibilities still taking shape. James spoke first, practical as always. "We have 7 potential production partners interested in immediate discussions. The Department of Energy wants advanced testing data for regulatory review, and the press coverage from today will generate more interest than we're currently structured to manage. All problems I can help solve," Serena offered, her tone careful, neither presumptuous nor hesitant. "If that's what you want." Henry moved to his original Phoenix engine, powering it down with the attentive care of someone handling something precious. Without looking at Serena, he asked the question that would determine their future relationship. "Why are you really here?" Not the public explanation. The truth. Serena considered her answer carefully, understanding its importance. "When I first came to your workshop, I wanted redemption for myself, for my father's legacy." She ran a hand along the edge of her own creation, the smaller Phoenix still humming on the testing platform. "Building this changed that. Now I want to be part of something that matters more than corporate success or personal vindication. Something that could actually help people the way Sarah intended." Her gaze met Henry's directly. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know nothing I do can undo what my father did to you and Sarah. But I've seen what the Phoenix can become, not just technically, but what it represents." Her voice strengthened with conviction. And I want to help make that vision real, whether my name is attached to it or not. Henry was silent for a long moment, studying her with the evaluative attention he typically reserved for engineering problems. Then he turned to James. What do you think James looked between them, measuring the distance still separating them against the potential of what they might accomplish together? I think Sarah would say we need all the help we can get. He paused, adding with gentle emphasis, and I think she'd remind you that the Phoenix was never about who built it. It was always about what it could do. The reference to Sarah might have once triggered Henry's retreat, a protective withdrawal from the pain of memory. Instead, he nodded slowly, acceptance, gradually replacing reluctance in his expression. 3 months, he said finally. We worked together for 3 months, a trial partnership. Then we reassess. It wasn't forgiveness or trust, not yet. But it was opportunity, a door opening, where once had been only walls. Serena recognized the significance of the concession and responded with appropriate restraint, neither celebrating nor pressing for more than Henry was prepared to offer. I'll have my attorneys prepare partnership documents that protect your controlling interest and patent ownership, she said simply. Phoenix Dynamics remains yours. I'm just here to help build what you and Sarah started. As if on cue, both Phoenix engines in the room synchronized their harmonic cycling, the sound filling the space with a reminder of what had brought them to this moment. Not personal ambition or corporate strategy, but the technology itself. A creation that carried within its design principles that transcended its creators, that demanded to exist in the world not for profit or prestige, but because it offered genuine solution. In that moment of mechanical harmony, something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet partnership, but recognition. A shared understanding that the Phoenix represented something larger than either of them, something worthy of setting aside personal history to protect and promote. Not reconciliation, but alignment toward purpose that mattered more than the past that divided them. As autumn deepened toward winter, Phoenix Dynamics underwent rapid transformation. The small workshop expanded into adjacent industrial space, then into a proper research and development facility. Engineering staff grew from 3 to 15, each specialist, bringing expertise to particular aspects of the technology, while Henry maintained oversight of systems integration. Government testing procedures began in parallel with production preparations requiring extensive documentation and verification protocols. Throughout this expansion, Serena proved her value beyond expectations. Her understanding of regulatory requirements streamlined approval processes that might otherwise have delayed development for months. Her corporate connections facilitated equipment acquisition and manufacturing partnerships that respected the technology's integrity while ensuring viable production scaling. Most importantly, her business acumen complemented Henry's technical genius, translating innovation into sustainable implementation without compromising core principles. Their working relationship remained formal, professional boundaries carefully maintained on both sides. They spoke almost exclusively about the Phoenix personal history, relegated to necessary context rather than ongoing focus. Yet in that limited engagement, a cautious respect began to develop. Henry acknowledging Serena's genuine commitment to the technology, Serena recognizing the depth of Henry's vision beyond mere mechanical innovation. James Carter watched this evolution with quiet satisfaction, serving as occasional intermediary when communication faltered, but otherwise allowing their professional rapport to develop organically. He understood better than either of them how their complementary strengths enhanced the Phoenix's prospects for widespread implementation. Meanwhile, Whitmore Motors faced its own transformation under circumstances Serena had initiated before joining Phoenix Dynamics. The independent ethics board she'd established now oversaw sweeping reforms in patent acquisition and engineering practices. The Department of Justice investigation into the original theft of Henry's patents proceeded with full cooperation from company leadership, resulting in substantial financial settlements, but no criminal charges given the statute of limitations. Most significantly, Serena had appointed interim leadership that prioritized authentic innovation over market manipulation, a philosophical shift that initially alarmed shareholders but gradually earned cautious support as new development initiatives showed promising results. She maintained majority ownership but removed herself from operational control, creating separation that allowed both Whitmore Motors and Phoenix Dynamics to function independently. As the 3-month trial period neared its conclusion, tension returned to the Phoenix workshop. The question of continued partnership loomed over daily operations, unspoken but increasingly present as the deadline approached. Henry had avoided direct discussion of the future arrangement, focusing instead on technical refinements to the production model. Serena had respected his reticence, demonstrating her commitment through consistent results rather than persuasive arguments. The decision point arrived on a snowy December morning. Henry called Serena and James into the private office that had been established in the expanded facility, a space Henry rarely used, preferring the workshop floor with its tangible progress and mechanical certainty. The formal setting heightened the moment's significance, suggesting conclusions reached and determinations made. "I've been reviewing our progress over the past 3 months," Henry began without preamble. "The production prototypes are exceeding performance expectations. Regulatory approval is proceeding faster than anticipated. Investor interest has secured funding through initial manufacturing phases." He placed a document on the desk between them, a revised partnership agreement with terms that would extend their collaboration indefinitely. "The 3-month trial has demonstrated clear benefit from our combined expertise." He continued, his tone deliberately neutral. "From a purely practical perspective, continuing the arrangement makes sense for the technology's development." Serena studied the document without reaching for it, recognizing that more remained unsaid. And from a non-practical perspective, Henry's gaze fixed on the Phoenix schematic mounted on the wall behind her, the original design he and Sarah had created together, now refined through 15 years of persistence and recent collaborative improvement. "I've spent most of my adult life defining myself by what was taken from me, by what I lost." He shifted his attention directly to Serena, his expression revealing emotional complexity typically hidden behind professional reserve. "The past 3 months have reminded me that Sarah wasn't building a technology for the sake of our recognition or success. She was building a solution because the world needed it." His voice strengthened with quiet certainty. "Continuing to define this project by the theft that interrupted it dishonors what she intended." The acknowledgement carried weight beyond the immediate partnership decision, suggesting a personal evolution in how Henry understood his own journey. Serena recognized its significance, responding with appropriate sobriety rather than relief or celebration. "What Sarah and you created deserves to exist on its own terms, not as a response to past injustice." She met his gaze directly. "I can't undo what my father did. I can't erase the years that were taken from you. But I can help ensure the Phoenix achieves what you and Sarah envisioned. Not for my redemption, but because it's the right thing to do." James, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "This was never about forgiveness, Henry. It was about honoring Sarah's vision. The path forward does that more effectively than holding on to the past." Henry nodded slowly, the motion carrying acceptance of truths he'd been gradually acknowledging throughout their collaboration. He pushed the partnership agreement towards Serena, the gesture deliberate and final. "The Phoenix belongs in the world," he said simply. "Let's put it there." The moment lacked dramatic reconciliation or emotional catharsis, instead offering something more sustainable. Not friendship precisely, but professional respect anchored in shared purpose that transcended personal history. A recognition that the technology they were building embodied principles larger than either of them: regeneration over consumption, collaboration over competition, solution over ownership. As winter settled over Detroit, Phoenix Dynamics continued its methodical progress toward production implementation. The expanded partnership brought stability and strategic direction that accelerated development while maintaining the technology's integrity. Henry and Serena established a working rhythm that capitalized on their complementary strengths while respecting the boundaries that remained necessary given their complex history. The world beyond their workshop took increasing notice. Industry publications speculated about market disruption when the Phoenix entered commercial production. Environmental organizations highlighted the emissions reductions potential. Investment analysts debated valuation models for technology that defied conventional metrics. Through it all, Henry and Serena maintained focus on the work itself rather than its public perception, united in understanding that the Phoenix represented not just mechanical innovation, but philosophical reimagining of humanity's relationship with technology. Not a product to be consumed, but a solution to be implemented. Not a commodity to be owned, but a vision to be realized. The engine Sarah had helped design, that Henry had preserved through years of obscurity, that Serena had helped bring into viable production, hummed with the harmonic precision of energies aligned toward purpose, a mechanical embodiment of regeneration that extended beyond its physical components, to transform those who engaged with its creation. Spring arrived in Detroit with an unpredictable temperament, days of gentle warmth interrupted by sudden frosts that mirrored Phoenix Dynamics' journey toward production launch. The facility had expanded dramatically now, occupying an entire industrial block with the original workshop preserved at its core, a seed from which concentric rings of growth had spread. What began with Henry's solitary efforts now employed 300, their combined expertise driving the imminent release of commercial Phoenix engines to market. The transformation extended to the company's founders. Henry Dalton, once invisible in his janitor's gray coveralls, had reluctantly become the public face of revolutionary technology. Business publications featured his reticent image on covers. Environmental organizations bestowed awards he never displayed, and speaking invitations accumulated unopened in his desk drawer. The attention scraped against his natural reserve, yet he endured it to safeguard the technology's integrity and ensure Sarah's vision wouldn't be compromised by corporate messaging. Serena Whitmore's evolution ran in the opposite direction. The former CEO now operated behind the scenes, applying her corporate acumen to infrastructure development and strategic planning with neither fanfare nor public recognition. She'd vacated her penthouse overlooking the Detroit River for a modest apartment within walking distance of the facility. Her designer wardrobe had given way to practical clothing more appropriate for production floors than boardrooms. The transition wasn't performance, but genuine realignment. Priorities shifted from impression management to substantive contribution. Their professional partnership had developed an efficient rhythm that respected the boundaries of their complex history. Technical specifications, production timelines, and implementation strategies flowed between them with increasing ease, yet personal matters remained largely untouched territory. This arrangement worked well enough, though James Carter occasionally observed that their mutual caution created blind spots where deeper collaboration might yield greater innovation. Today marked a critical milestone. The first production Phoenix engines would emerge complete from the newly installed assembly line, ready for distribution to initial commercial partners. The achievement warranted celebration, but Henry had refused any ceremonial acknowledgement, insisting they treat it as another working day. Serena had respected his preference, while quietly ensuring photographers documented the moment for historical archives. Henry stood at the assembly line's terminus, watching as the first production Phoenix completed its journey through the manufacturing process. Unlike conventional engines with their conspicuous mechanical complexity, the Phoenix presented deceptive simplicity, revolutionary components concealed within an elegant housing that prioritized function over visual impressiveness. He traced his fingertips across the surface, feeling the subtle vibration of potential energy waiting to be activated. 15 years, Henry. Serena's voice came unexpectedly from behind him, softer than her usual professional tone. She'd approached unnoticed amid the organized chaos of the manufacturing floor. From prototype to production. That's a significant journey by any measure. Henry didn't immediately turn his attention, focused on the engine before him. The comment carried weight beyond its simplicity, acknowledging the path from Sarah's death through his years of obscurity to this moment of vindication. When he finally faced Serena, his expression revealed a complexity of emotion that transcended mere satisfaction. "This should have happened a decade ago," he said without accusation, simply stating fact. "Sarah should be here to see it." Serena nodded, neither defending nor denying the truth in his observation. "She should be." Her gaze met his directly, their professional distance temporarily suspended by the occasion's significance. But her vision is present in every component, every integration point, every design principle. The Phoenix carries her imprint in its very architecture. The comment might once have triggered Henry's withdrawal, a retreat into the protective isolation that had defined his post-NASA years. Instead, he nodded slightly, the habitual tension in his features softening with acceptance. She would have appreciated the irony, he admitted, that her work finally reached production through partnership with the Whitmore family. The acknowledgement represented a meaningful shift in their carefully maintained boundaries, Henry allowing personal history to enter their conversation without immediate retreat. Serena recognized its significance but didn't press further, responding with similar restraint. "I think she would care less about whose name appears on the patents than the fact that the technology exists at all. The innovation was always more important than who received credit." Henry studied her with thoughtful attention, noting how thoroughly she'd internalized the principles underlying the Phoenix. The observation could have come directly from Sarah, suggesting understanding that went beyond technical competence to genuine alignment with the original vision. The moment expanded between them, charged with unrealized potential. Then the production supervisor approached with urgent questions about calibration parameters, and they reverted to established professional roles, the brief connection receding beneath immediate responsibilities. Later that evening, as the facility quieted for the night, Henry remained in the original workshop space, making adjustments to a specialized Phoenix variant designed for potential space applications. NASA had expressed interest in the technology's capabilities for long-duration missions, bringing his career full circle in ways both satisfying and bittersweet. The work absorbed him so completely that he didn't register Serena's arrival until she placed a steaming mug beside his workbench. "You missed the executive briefing," she noted without reproach. James handled it, but NASA's representative specifically asked about adaptation parameters for zero-gravity environments. Henry glanced at the coffee, then at Serena, momentarily disoriented by the casual gesture, suggesting familiarity they hadn't established. Throughout their partnership, she'd maintained scrupulous professionalism, never presuming connection beyond their working arrangement. "Did you tell them it's already designed for variable gravitational conditions? We incorporated those specifications in the original NASA prototype 15 years ago." Serena leaned against the adjacent workbench, maintaining comfortable distance while indicating willingness for extended conversation. "I mentioned that the core technology was developed with aerospace applications in mind. They seem surprised apparently your history with NASA isn't as widely recognized as one might expect." That was deliberate. Henry accepted the coffee, a small but meaningful acknowledgement of changing dynamics between them. The academic community quickly forgets those who exit without fanfare. He sipped thoughtfully, then added with unexpected candor, "After Sarah died, I wanted to disappear. Succeeded too well, evidently." Serena hesitated, weighing whether to pursue this personal reference or maintain their customary professional focus. The workshop's evening quiet seemed to encourage the former, creating space for conversation beyond technical parameters and production schedules. "Why maintenance work?" she asked finally. "With your qualifications, you could have found engineering positions even without revealing your NASA background. Why become a janitor?" Henry completed her question without defensiveness. "The answer isn't complicated. I needed work that required nothing of my mind or heart." He gestured toward the specialized Phoenix on his workbench. "Engineering demands both. I wasn't ready to give either after Sarah died." The explanation carried quiet dignity that commanded respect. Serena nodded, recognition dawning in her expression. "That's why you noticed details others missed in the engineering meetings at Whitmore Motors. You never actually stopped being an engineer even while pushing a mop." Henry's mouth curved slightly. "Old habits persist. When you've spent decades thinking in systems and energy flows, you notice misalignments, whether in engines or organizations." The observation opened space for reciprocal disclosure, an unspoken invitation Serena cautiously accepted. "I never considered the people who cleaned my office," she admitted, genuine regret coloring her tone. "Not as individuals with their own expertise and stories. I wonder how many other Henry Daltons I've overlooked throughout my career." "Probably several, though not necessarily with hidden engineering credentials," Henry replied, his tone lightening. "Most people contain dimensions their job titles never reveal." Their conversation flowed with unexpected ease, technical discussion of the NASA adaptation, gradually giving way to more personal exchange about their respective journeys. They spoke of Sarah not with the awkwardness of avoided grief, but with growing appreciation for how her vision continued through their collaboration. They acknowledged Charles Whitmore's actions without allowing them to dominate their current partnership. When they finally departed the workshop hours later, something fundamental had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but connection, anchored in mutual respect and shared purpose, that transcended their complicated history. The change was subtle but significant, suggesting possibilities beyond the carefully circumscribed professional relationship they'd maintained since the beginning of their collaboration. The following weeks brought intensifying public attention as commercial Phoenix engines entered the market. Performance reports exceeded even optimistic projections. Fleet vehicles equipped with Phoenix technology demonstrated efficiency ratings that upended industry standards and emissions reductions that satisfied the most demanding environmental criteria. Orders multiplied exponentially, stretching production capacity and necessitating expansion plans sooner than anticipated. Media coverage amplified proportionally, focusing not just on the technology, but on the unlikely partnership behind it. The narrative proved irresistible: the janitor whose revolutionary invention had been stolen, the CEO's daughter, who'd attempted to steal it again, their eventual collaboration creating something that transcended corporate competition. Profile pieces emphasized redemption and second chances, themes that resonated widely while simplifying the complex reality of their working relationship. Henry retreated further from public engagement as attention increased, delegating interviews to James while focusing on technical refinements for second-generation designs. Serena managed external partnerships and expansion planning, shielding the engineering team from distractions that might compromise development integrity. Their complementary approaches maintained operational stability despite mounting pressure from rapid success. Then came the offer that forced reconsideration of everything they'd built: Global Tech Industries, the world's largest manufacturer of conventional engines, proposed acquisition of Phoenix Dynamics for $12 billion, an unprecedented valuation for a company less than 2 years old. The offer included guaranteed positions for current leadership and promises to maintain the technology's environmental priorities. The executive team gathered in Phoenix Dynamics' main conference room, its windows overlooking the production floor, where engines continued rolling off assembly lines regardless of corporate deliberations above. Henry sat silently at the table's head, reviewing the proposal with inscrutable expression, while James outlined financial implications and Serena analyzed potential outcomes. "We should acknowledge what this represents," James began, pragmatism tempering his obvious excitement. "Global Tech hasn't merely recognized our current market position. They're betting on Phoenix technology becoming the new industry standard. $12 billion isn't just acquisition cost, it's insurance against their existing infrastructure becoming obsolete." Serena nodded agreement while studying Henry's reaction more than the proposal itself. "Their strategic assessment is sound, but we need to consider implementation consequences. Global Tech maintains exclusive supplier relationships with 17 automobile manufacturers globally. Acquisition gives the Phoenix immediate distribution channels we'd spend years developing independently." Her analysis continued with characteristic thoroughness, examining regulatory implications, manufacturing scalability, and market penetration timelines under various scenarios. Throughout, Henry remained silent, his attention shifting between the proposal document and the production floor visible beyond the glass. When Serena concluded, Henry finally spoke his question, addressing not financial terms, but fundamental principles. "What happens to the Phoenix itself under Global Tech ownership? Not the patent or manufacturing rights, the technology's integrity. Its purpose." The question cut through conventional acquisition considerations to the heart of their enterprise. Serena immediately adjusted her response to address values rather than valuations. "They've committed to maintaining our environmental standards and design principles in writing," she acknowledged. "But contractual commitment doesn't guarantee operational priorities after integration begins. Global Tech's corporate culture prioritizes quarterly results over long-term vision. Their engineering philosophy favors proprietary systems over open technological evolution." Henry nodded slightly, his concerns confirmed rather than alleviated. "Sarah didn't design the Phoenix to become another corporate asset," he said quietly. "She saw it as a catalyst for systemic change, not just in engine design, but in how we conceptualize energy consumption itself." His gaze shifted to the workers below, assembling components with precision born of proper training and genuine commitment. Global Tech would preserve the mechanics while discarding the philosophy. James sighed, recognizing the direction their discussion was taking. $12 billion, Henry. Security for every employee. Resources for next-generation research without financial constraints. His tone held no judgment, merely acknowledgement of practical realities. Sometimes principles require compromise to achieve wider implementation. "Not these principles." Henry's response came without hesitation. "The Phoenix works precisely because it doesn't compromise, because it integrates rather than forces, adapts rather than dominates." His attention returned to Serena, evaluating her reaction. "What's your assessment? Your corporate experience provides perspective I lack. The question represented significant evolution in their partnership. Henry actively seeking her counsel on a fundamental decision affecting the technology's future. Serena considered carefully before responding, aware of the trust implied in his inquiry. From traditional business perspective, this offer exceeds reasonable expectation. We'd be establishing market value at unprecedented levels. Her analytical tone shifted to something more personal as she continued. But we're not building the Phoenix for conventional metrics. We're building it because it represents a better way forward, not just technically, but philosophically. She met Henry's gaze directly. I've spent most of my professional life pursuing exactly the kind of validation this offer represents. But our work together has shown me there are more meaningful measures than acquisition value. The Phoenix deserves to develop according to its own internal logic, not global tech's quarterly targets. Henry studied her with evaluative attention, searching for calculation behind her words. Finding none, he nodded once, decision crystallizing. We decline the offer, maintain independence, continue building according to the original vision. The declaration carried finality that precluded further discussion. James accepted it with resigned pragmatism, understanding that financial considerations remain secondary to technological integrity and Henry's priorities. Serena immediately began outlining alternative growth strategies that would preserve their independence while meeting increasing demand, her expertise redirected towards supporting Henry's decision rather than challenging it. As they exited the conference room, Henry paused beside Serena, acknowledging what her support had meant. You could have advocated for acquisition. Your ownership stake would have made you a billionaire several times over. Serena smiled slightly, genuine amusement lighting her features. I was already wealthy beyond reasonable need. More millions wouldn't alter my life meaningfully. She glanced toward the production floor where Phoenix engines continued their journey from concept to implementation. The exchange marked another evolution in their relationship. Mutual recognition that shared values had replaced professional caution in their interactions. Not friendship exactly, but partnership anchored in genuine alignment rather than strategic necessity. The decision to remain independent intensified Phoenix Dynamics' already demanding timeline. Without Global Tech's established infrastructure, they needed to expand production capacity, strengthen supply chains, and build distribution networks, simultaneously tasks typically phased over several years compressed into immediate necessity. Serena's corporate experience became invaluable as she restructured operations to accommodate explosive growth while maintaining quality standards. James leveraged extensive industry connections to secure components despite supply chain disruptions. Henry focused on training engineering teams, ensuring the technology's underlying philosophy remained intact during rapid expansion. The pace extracted personal costs from all three. 18-hour workdays became standard, meals were consumed during meetings, sleep occurred in brief intervals between crisis management. Yet beneath the exhaustion ran current of shared purpose that sustained their efforts. The Phoenix was helping people transforming energy patterns with each installation, fulfilling Sarah's vision in measurable ways. 4 months after rejecting Global Tech's offer, Phoenix Dynamics reached a critical milestone. The millionth engine rolled off the production line, significant not for the arbitrary number, but for what it represented: scale sufficient to influence industry standards. Manufacturing facilities operated in 3 states, international partnerships had established production in Europe and Asia, and retrofit programs allowed Phoenix installation in existing vehicles, reducing emissions while extending operational life. The company organized modest celebration in the original workshop, now preserved as historical reminder of the Phoenix's humble beginnings. Staff gathered in rotating shifts to maintain continuous production, sharing catered meals and raising glasses to collective achievement rather than individual recognition. Henry moved through the gathering with uncharacteristic ease, his years of isolated focus gradually yielding to genuine connection with the community that had formed around Sarah's and his creation. He spoke with engineers about technical refinements, with production staff about assembly improvements, with administrative personnel about operational efficiencies, not with forced sociability of corporate leadership, but with authentic interest in their contributions. Serena observed his transformation from across the room, noting how the former janitor had evolved into a leader who inspired through expertise and integrity rather than positional authority. When their eyes met briefly across the crowded space, shared acknowledgement passed between them, appreciation for how far they'd traveled from their first confrontation at Whitmore Motors. Later that evening, as celebration wound down and staff departed, Henry and Serena found themselves alone in the original workshop. The space held historical resonance for Henry, connection to Sarah, and their shared vision, for Serena, beginning of transformation that had redefined her understanding of value and purpose. Remarkable journey from that first demonstration, Serena observed, gesturing toward the vintage Barracuda now permanently displayed in the workshop's corner, its exterior restored through careful preservation. Henry nodded, allowing memory to surface without the pain that had once accompanied it. Sarah would have appreciated this aspect most, not just the technology reaching production, but the community that's formed around it. She always believed the Phoenix would connect people in unexpected ways. The observation opened space for personal reflection that might once have been carefully avoided. Serena considered momentarily before responding with equal candor. "I've been thinking about how my father would view all this," she said, moving toward the Barracuda to examine its features. "Not the commercial success or technical validation, those would have mattered only as competitive advantages. But this," she gestured to encompass the facility beyond the workshop walls. "A community building something beneficial together, something that helps rather than exploits. That would have been fundamentally foreign to his worldview. And to the person I was a year ago," she added quietly. Henry studied her, thoughtfully noting how thoroughly she had transformed from the corporate executive who had mocked his car in the parking lot. The change extended beyond appearance to fundamental orientation, from competition to collaboration, from extraction to creation, from control to contribution. "We're all works in progress." Henry observed, simple words carrying unexpected grace. Sarah used to say that people, like engines, can be rebuilt, recalibrated, restored to better functioning than before. The reference to Sarah emerged without the defensive withdrawal that had once accompanied any mention of his wife. Serena recognized the significance of its natural inclusion in their conversation, evidence of healing that extended beyond the Phoenix project itself. "She continues teaching us both, doesn't she?" Serena's observation carried genuine appreciation rather than performance. "Through the engine, through the principles embedded in its design." Henry nodded, moving to stand beside the Barracuda that had carried the original prototype through years of obscurity. "Every day. When we face engineering challenges, I still find myself asking what Sarah would suggest. Her perspective remains part of the process guiding decisions even now." He ran his hand along the vehicle's restored fender, physical connection to memory. "For years after she died, remembering was too painful. I sealed everything away, her notes, our research, even thoughts of the future we'd planned. I focused solely on preserving what we'd built rather than expanding it." His voice strengthened as he continued. "Working with you and James has changed that perspective. Seeing the Phoenix reach people who need it has restored something I thought permanently lost." The disclosure represented unprecedented openness, Henry allowing vulnerability that professional boundaries had previously precluded. Serena responded with equal authenticity, acknowledging her own transformation without diminishing his. "The Phoenix has changed me too. Before joining this project, I measured value through market share and profit margins. I valued control above collaboration and saw people primarily as assets or obstacles." Her gaze met Henry's directly. "Learning to build something with my hands, something that helps rather than exploits, has transformed how I understand purpose itself." The evening deepened around them, workshops, familiar tools and components, witnessing conversation that transcended professional collaboration without presuming personal intimacy. They spoke of Sarah not as absence between them, but as presence that had shaped their shared work, of how the Phoenix had catalyzed transformation in their respective journeys, of future possibilities that technology might enable beyond current applications. When they finally departed hours later, something fundamental had shifted again in their relationship, not erasing complicated history, but building upon it foundation for genuine partnership anchored in shared vision rather than strategic necessity. The following months brought both expansion and challenge. Phoenix technology appeared in commercial transportation fleets, reducing emissions while extending range. Agricultural applications emerged spontaneously as farmers adapted the systems to irrigation pumps and processing equipment. International interest intensified, bringing regulatory complexities requiring diplomatic navigation alongside technical compliance. Throughout this accelerating implementation, Henry and Serena maintained balance between growth and integrity, ensuring the Phoenix reached maximum beneficial impact without compromising design principles. Their partnership deepened through shared problem-solving, professional boundaries, gradually relaxing into comfortable collaboration that acknowledged personal connection without requiring explicit definition. Then came unexpected news that would test their partnership. Angela Torres, the investigative journalist whose expose had revealed Charles Whitmore's theft of Henry's patents, published new findings suggesting the Phoenix's core technology had been developed using classified research conducted under government contract. If verified, these allegations could trigger patent challenges, security investigations, and restrictions on commercial distribution. Henry reacted with uncharacteristic anger when the article appeared, calling emergency meeting that temporarily halted operations. "These accusations are completely false," he stated without preamble as Serena and James entered the conference room. The Phoenix was developed during personal time separately from NASA projects. Sarah and I documented everything meticulously, precisely because we anticipated ownership challenges. James maintained professional calm despite the situation's gravity. "We should prepare a comprehensive response demonstrating clear development timeline and establishing definitively separate intellectual property paths." His attention shifted to Serena. "Your father's records might help establish distinct lineage between NASA work and Phoenix development." Serena had already begun accessing archived Whitmore Motors documentation, her expression focused despite personal implications. "The timing creates vulnerability," she acknowledged. "My father claimed acquisition precisely when you and Sarah were transitioning from NASA. The overlap creates plausible confusion about proprietary boundaries." She met Henry's gaze directly. "But confusion isn't evidence. We have Sarah's notebooks, your documented research path, and material composition records establishing novel development. The Phoenix incorporates principles you encountered at NASA, certainly, but the implementation represents genuine innovation beyond government-funded research." Henry's anger subsided somewhat, replaced by strategic consideration. "We need more than technical documentation. This attack targets public perception as much as legal standing. Doubt alone could trigger government intervention or investor hesitation." His attention remained on Serena. "Your experience becomes critical here. How do we respond effectively?" The question represented complete evolution in their partnership, Henry not merely accepting Serena's expertise, but actively seeking her leadership in crisis management. She recognized the trust implied and responded accordingly. "We control the narrative through transparency rather than defensive positioning." She began strategic acumen, engaging fully. "Release comprehensive development documentation publicly, establish clear timeline from concept through current implementation, demonstrate independent funding paths separate from government contracts." Her analysis continued with increasing confidence, outlining multifaceted approach addressing technical, legal, and public perception aspects simultaneously. As she concluded, Henry nodded approval, tension visibly easing from his posture. "Implementation begins immediately. We'll need full organizational engagement." Their coordinated response mobilized Phoenix Dynamics' resources, technical staff, assembling documentation, while legal teams prepared for potential challenges, and communications specialists developed messaging. Henry, James, and Serena worked in seamless collaboration, complementary expertise, creating response more effective than any could have managed individually. Within 48 hours, Phoenix Dynamics released detailed chronology of the technology's development supported by Sarah's notebooks, Henry's research journals, material acquisition records, and witness statements from former NASA colleagues. The documentation established clear separation between government-funded research and independent development, demonstrating novel innovation paths not derived from classified work. Simultaneously, Serena contacted Angela Torres, directly offering complete access to corporate archives rather than threatening legal action. The unexpected transparency caught the journalist off guard, her investigative instincts engaged by approach that invited scrutiny rather than deflecting it. "I expected denials and attorneys," Torres admitted during their meeting. "Want open access to your development history." Serena maintained professional composure while projecting authentic confidence. "We have nothing to hide regarding the Phoenix's development. The technology represents genuine innovation by Henry and Sarah Dalton, documented meticulously throughout its evolution. Her directness carried persuasive force precisely because it avoided defensive posturing. Examine everything. Interview anyone involved. We welcome thorough investigation because it will confirm what we've stated publicly. Torres studied Serena with evaluative attention, noting how thoroughly she had transformed from their previous encounters. The change extended beyond appearance to fundamental orientation toward transparency and accountability that contrasted sharply with traditional crisis management. "You've changed significantly since our last interview," Torres observed. "The Serena Whitmore I met initially would have responded with legal threats and damage control. Different priorities create different responses," Serena acknowledged without defensiveness. "A year ago, I was protecting corporate reputation and market position. Now I'm safeguarding technology that genuinely matters, not just commercially, but for the difference it makes in people's lives." The distinction reflected authentic evolution in how Serena understood her role and responsibilities. Torres recognized genuine conviction behind the statement, her journalistic skepticism tempered by growing recognition that the Phoenix Dynamics narrative might be more complex than initial reporting suggested. Over the following weeks, Torres conducted comprehensive investigation, interviewing former NASA colleagues, examining technical documentation, and analyzing patent applications with independent experts. Her findings, published in detailed follow-up article, largely vindicated Phoenix Dynamics, while acknowledging complex intersections between government-funded research and private innovation. The crisis response demonstrated not just the Phoenix's technical legitimacy, but the effectiveness of Henry and Serena's partnership. Their complementary approaches, his unwavering commitment to technological integrity, her strategic understanding of narrative management created stronger protection than either could have established alone. The experience strengthened their already effective collaboration, transforming cautious professional alignment into genuine partnership anchored in mutual trust. As summer approached, the Museum of American Innovation contacted Phoenix Dynamics with unexpected request. They wanted to feature the Barracuda as centerpiece of new exhibit on transformative American technologies, recognizing the vehicle's unique role in preserving revolutionary innovation through years of obscurity. The invitation represented meaningful validation beyond commercial success, acknowledgement of the Phoenix's cultural and historical significance. Henry spent a June evening making final adjustments to the Barracuda before its scheduled transfer. Serena found him there, approaching quietly to observe his careful work on the vehicle that had carried so much history between them. "There's something fitting about this," she noted after several minutes of respectful silence. "The car everyone once mocked becoming museum centerpiece that tells the Phoenix story." Henry looked up from his calibrations, relaxed familiarity, replacing the wariness that had once characterized their interactions. "Sarah would appreciate the symmetry. She always maintained that appearance reveals nothing about genuine value." His hands moved with practiced precision across the engine housing. 15 years hiding in plain sight, now recognized as cultural touchstone. Life takes unexpected turns. The observation invited reciprocal reflection. Serena considered momentarily before responding with equal candor. "A year ago, I dismissed this car as worthless based solely on appearance. Judged you the same way because of your position." She moved closer, examining the Phoenix engine with genuine appreciation. "Now, I understand that value exists in what something accomplishes, not in its external presentation. In substance rather than surface." Henry straightened, wiping his hands as he studied Serena with thoughtful attention. "Your transformation has been as significant as the Phoenix itself," he observed without flattery. "From corporate executive focused on acquisition to genuine partner in building something meaningful. Sarah would have been impressed by how completely you've embraced the principles we hope to embed in this technology." The reference to Sarah emerged naturally, her memory no longer barrier between them, but shared foundation for their work. Serena recognized its significance, evidence of healing that extended beyond the technology to the people connected through it. "I had excellent teachers," she acknowledged simply. "You and Sarah designed more than an engine. You created embodiment of a philosophy that transforms everything it touches, including those of us who engage with it." As they completed final preparations for the museum transfer, their conversation continued with comfortable familiarity that acknowledged personal connection without requiring definition. They spoke of future applications, expansion strategies, and potential evolution beyond current designs, shared vision extending forward rather than remaining anchored in complicated past. The following morning, transportation specialists arrived to carefully load the Barracuda for its journey to Dearborn, Michigan. Staff gathered to witness the vehicle's departure, many touching its fenders or taking photographs beside the unassuming car that had carried revolutionary technology through years of obscurity. Henry and Serena stood slightly apart, watching as the vehicle that had initiated their unlikely partnership was secured for transport. The moment carried emotional significance beyond professional milestone, representing both culmination and continuation of journey neither could have anticipated. "Hard to let it go?" Serena asked quietly, noting the complexity in Henry's expression. He considered the question thoughtfully. "Less difficult than expected. The car served its purpose, protected the Phoenixes until the world was ready for it. Now it continues that purpose differently, telling the story to people who might never directly encounter the technology." He turned towards Serena, his gaze direct in a way that would have been impossible months earlier. The Phoenix was never about specific implementation anyway. It was about principles that could be applied universally. His voice strengthened with quiet certainty. "Sarah understood that from the beginning. I'm still learning it. We all are." Serena nodded, recognition deepening in her expression. That's why declining global tech made sense despite the financial implications. The Phoenix needs to evolve according to its own principles, not corporate acquisition strategies. She gestured toward the production facility, visible beyond the workshop windows. It was never about better engines. It was about better relationships with energy, with resources, with each other. The observation captured essence of transformation they had both undergone, from antagonists defined by past grievances to partners united by shared vision. Not friendship exactly, though personal connection had emerged alongside professional respect, but alignment toward purpose that transcended individual histories. 1 week later, they stood together at the Museum of American Innovation as the Phoenix exhibit opened to the public. Museum lighting transformed the Barracuda's faded copper paint to warm gold, highlighting the careful restoration that preserved its historical significance. Visitors lingered before the unassuming vehicle, captivated by the story of revolutionary technology hidden within ordinary exterior metaphor that resonated across demographic boundaries. "Do you think she would be proud?" Serena asked quietly. Henry was silent for a moment, considering not just the immediate question, but the complex path that had brought them to this point, from antagonism to partnership, from theft to collaboration, from separate grievances to shared purpose. When he finally spoke, his voice carried certainty, anchored in deep understanding of the woman whose vision had guided their journey. "Yes, I think she would be. Not just of the technology, but of what it's becoming in the world. How it's helping people. How it's changing our relationship with energy." His gaze met Serena's directly. "And I think she would appreciate how the Phoenix has brought people together, even those who began as adversaries." As the Barracuda's engine hummed to life in final demonstration, its distinctive sound filling the museum space, Henry and Serena listened not to the impressed reactions of the gathered crowd, but to the harmony itself, perfect balance of energies that had once seemed impossibly opposed, now aligned in shared purpose. The sound spoke to possibilities extending beyond mechanical operation, to fundamental reconsideration of how broken connections might be restored, how apparent enemies might become essential partners, how what appears worthless might contain immeasurable value. In that moment of mechanical perfection, they recognized what the journey had taught them both, that true regeneration applies not just to energy systems, but to human relationships, that the principles embedded in the Phoenix could transform more than transportation. The rusty car that everyone had mocked had indeed concealed fortune within its exterior, not measured in global tech's 12 billion, but in renewed purpose, restored relationships, and revolution of understanding that would continue expanding long after they departed the museum floor. The engine that had begun as Sarah and Henry's shared dream, preserved through years of obscurity and finally brought to fruition through unlikely partnership, continued its harmonious cycle, emblematic of what becomes possible when people discover something worth building together that transcends their differences.